Coming up next on Twitch, we have a brand new Mini ITX case for DIY users. We have a comprehensive budget PC building guide, and Seiki is releasing some new 4K monitors. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 273, recorded June 26th, 2014. A $2,500 gaming notebook and a $400 gaming PC. Hey everyone, welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, the show on the Twit Network, where we look at the news and the hardware information and all the gadgets that were launched, and we talk about PC hardware and kind of get you caught up on what happened in the last week of it. And believe it or not, we're still going strong. 273 episodes in, still PC hardware to discuss. Patrick out on assignment, I guess we'll say, family event. Filling in for him is our good friend Robert Heron. Robert, how you doing?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for joining us. Let's just kind of like jump right into stuff here. We were talking right before we started the show. You started looking through some of the stories that we collected for it, and the Cooler Master Elite 110 Mini ITX case. This is a review that Lee posted, and it is kind of another one of these Mini ITX super small form factor designs that I think really changed the way PCs, like DIY consumers, can get into building a PC.
Without a doubt. That form factor, you're talking about a 6.5-inch by 6.5-inch motherboard. So you are going to lose out on multiple graphics card capabilities if you really needed that. But if you don't, and most people don't, having a motherboard that small in a case that compact, yet still able to hold all the cool stuff you want, like a full-size graphics card, full-size PSU, in addition to just a pretty slick-looking design as well. I think everyone should build at least one Mini ITX system in their lifetime, if not to be your main day-to-day box, but just a good way to experiment too with the hardware out there. Let alone if you're putting together something for the living room like a home theater PC or just a compact, efficient box overall. Right. You can get motherboards also with integrated graphics in that size format. So if you really want to cut down the components and cost, you can go that route as well. But I think it's an attractive design.
It is. I like the case itself. It's very clean front. I like the side mount USB and kind of external audio connections. Kind of clean things up if you're not using those. What I think is interesting is you brought up home theater PC, and it used to be that when people thought of Mini ITX cases, that's all they assumed that they would be used for. Oh, this is only useful if you're putting it in a home theater. If it's something that's going to be in the living room and other people are going to see it, and it gets in the way of things. But in reality, more and more people just don't have the need for multiple graphics cards, or they don't have the need for, having 10 hard drives in a system. So going with a single Mini ITX platform design, even for your main computer, the one you game on, the one you do all your work on, is making more and more sense.
Totally. And that ability with a form factor that small, it gives you more places you can put the case. It's no longer delegated to the floor under the desk, or if you're fortunate enough to have a desk that has like a holder in it, to at least get the case itself off the floor. This could actually just sit on the desk right next to a monitor, and depending on how you configure it, if you do it right, you can have a very, very quiet system as well, even in something that small. Run the fans at appropriate speeds if you even need, direct cooling. I'm sure you need to have at least one fan running, but between that and the PSU, pulling air through that small space, not until you get into high-end gaming where you're going to be cranking a GPU up, where you'd have to really worry about the thermals, I think, in a box like that. Still, though, yep. I'm a big fan of having more options for the Mini ITX size motherboards anyway. So, and that just gives me one other option to pick from. I'm usually looking at, I want to say, Silverstone or other companies as well. So I buy a lot of Cooler Master products. It's nice to see them actually make a case specific to that small size motherboard.
Yep. I would say I do find it maybe I don't think maybe building a Mini ITX machine should be your first machine that you build. If you're new to the DIY scene, I think that, and in many cases, and even with the Cooler Master 110 that we're looking at here, there are many more complications when building a system in a Mini ITX design. You know, things are going in spaces they don't normally go in. Cables have to be routed in a way they might not normally be routed in. If you're using a water cooler, things are going to get very cramped and very tight, and it can actually be pretty frustrating if you don't already kind of know what the end product is supposed to look like. So
Totally.
it's,
You're
when you're
100%
building it
right
in a
on that.
full-size ATX case, like you've got plenty of room, you can get both your hands in there, you can run cables where you need to, and you can kind of understand the architecture of a PC before diving into, okay, now I want to mash this down into as small of a space as possible and still have it be functional.
You could then step up in that case to something like a micro ATX, and I fully agree. I don't think this is really should be your first. If you've never built a PC before, I think starting with micro ATX or micro Mini ITX would be a challenge. Like for the reasons you mentioned, specifically the space and to be able to get everything to fit right. And all the concerns that go into a larger box become magnified, I think, with a smaller system like this in terms of things like airflow and proper cooling and all of that, just to tie it into having a fully reliable system. Maybe not your first, but also you could also just talking about ATX size boards. You don't have to go with the full ATX. You could have that micro ATX as well, just to get the size down a little bit if you want. And sometimes you can even save money if there's multiple versions of a particular motherboard and you don't need the full sized ATX sized board. Go with that micro ATX instead of maybe if you're not ready to step into the Mini ITX space. So.
Yep. But if you are interested in Mini ITX, take a look at this review of the Cooler Master Elite 110. Elite talks about some of the strengths of its compact design, fairly quiet included fan. It does have one 120 millimeter rather intake fan included with space for two 80 millimeter fans. You can put that full-size power supply in there. You can use a dual slot graphics card up to like 9.5 inches long, I think. You can still include like 3 standard size hard drives and 4 2.5-inch SSDs. So you don't lose out on a whole bunch except for the multi GPU side thing, as you mentioned a couple of times. So, and hey, no sharp metal edges inside, it says as well, which if you've ever built a PC in a cheap case and come out bleeding, you probably understand the downsides of that.
But that blood sacrifice is critical to performance, though. And I think for any new computer, it used to be the case. Especially, I remember the old school, your pressed or your rolled steel cases with nothing but sharp edges inside, and you were almost always guaranteed on any computer build to at least leave a couple drops of blood behind. So it's nice to see them actually focused on that to make sure that the build experience with a quality case, it should be pain-free for the most part, and
physically pain-free.
And like you mentioned too, the storage capacity on that box, I think for most people that's going to be plenty for a lot of folks. If you have the option for multiple full-size hard drives, multiple SSDs if you want, whereas most folks I think nowadays are really going with maybe one SSD and maybe one full-size hard drive as well, just for your critical storage. But that sounds like a win-win box and something I'll be looking at for my new PC build coming up.
In a different direction, we have a story here on the MSI GT70 PE. It's a enormous gaming notebook, and it's not very different than some of the other gaming notebooks we've seen before. It is a 17.3-inch screen. It's 1080p. It has kind of the highest end Haswell mobility processor in it, the Core i7-4800 MQ, runs at 3 gigahertz. It's got 32 gigs of memory in it. It's got 328 gig SSDs running in RAID 0, and it has the flagship Nvidia mobile GPU, the GeForce GTX 880 EM, with 8 gigs of graphics memory, which I think is pretty much overkill for a 1080p resolution screen, which you would probably be gaming at the majority of the time.
3 SSDs in a notebook running in RAID 0. That's
3. They're MSATA SSDs, I think, but still 3 SSDs running in there, plus that 1 terabyte 7200 RPM hard drive. So you've got 384 gigabytes of primary SSD storage, and then 1 terabyte for external, for long-term storage. But you can see, like that thing is thick. Look at the size of it versus the USB ports on there. It is not a light case, or it's not a light system. You're talking probably, where does it say here, 8 pounds or something like that.
It's a desktop replacement right there.
It's
Every gamer I
is.
know that has switched over to a notebook has no desire at all to go back to a full desktop system. So there is a demand for these boxes out there, or these ultra gaming notebooks, so to speak. And I'd be curious just to see what the performance of the latest Nvidia part is compared to what's come in the last couple of years, because
Yep.
I'm a little torn on the whole thing, because I really love high frame rates. I love cranking everything up to maximum quality. And I'm really not able to do that on most notebooks out. And that's why I stick with, a full desktop gaming system for my personal needs and just my desire to,
Yep.
high frame rate, high quality gaming. But that portability is great.
Yeah. Like the thermal restrictions on a notebook, just you're not going to be able to get the same performance out of it. The GTX 880 EM, I think, is equivalent to a GTX 770 on the desktop. I think that's what it is. And that's a $320 desktop card, but it's probably running a little bit lower clock speeds. Even if you take battery life kind of out of it completely, if you're plugged into the wall, there's still a restriction on how much area there can be for a heatsink, and where that, it can't overheat all the other components inside that system. But if you're a frequenter of, going to LAN parties, or even taking your machine over to a friend's house to play games that way, the flexibility of being able to just close up a laptop, throw it in a big backpack with a keyboard and a mouse, or maybe just a mouse, is pretty nice. I go to QuakeCon every year. It's coming up here next month, and every year the number of gamers in there using laptops increases. It's just easy, right? We've seen it progress from when you go to a LAN party, you'd have a full tower ATX case with maybe a 17 or a 19-inch CRT monitor, and you had to have like pull carts and stuff to get in and out, to carry all that kind of equipment in. And now we're seeing the small form factor cases that we talked about first, super light LED or LCD panels. And then you go down a little bit further and you kind of integrate it all into one. And you can bring an external monitor if you want. But, one of the interesting features. Go ahead.
One question about that particular system, though, the graphics, it's loaded with what they're claiming 8 gigabytes of DDR5. Do you need that much RAM, or is that just mostly to just, put a check mark box and say we've got a lot of RAM in this box for graphics anyway? But what scenario would even come close to using all of that?
I don't know, right? Like if you look at the highest end desktop graphics cards, you're talking about 4 gigabytes in a Radeon R9 290X, 3 gigabytes on a GTX 780 Ti. If you get into like a Titan Z or a Titan Black, rather, you got 6 gigs of memory, and that's still not as much. Like, it doesn't make any sense to have 8 gigs of memory dedicated to the graphics card on this system. I think it's simply, hey, memory was cheap when we were speccing this part out, and it's a great feature to put on there for, as you say, like a checkbox feature. Somebody's going through, well, this one has 4, but this one has 8. I'm going to go with the guy that has 8. Especially, again, considering the screen is 1080p. If you said, well, we're going to do 4K gaming or multiple 4K, resolution displays, and you had the power to do that, the extra memory can be helpful. But at 1080p, I don't think it's not really worth having. The only other interesting feature in this, in this notebook is it's the first notebook we saw that had Nvidia battery boost in it, which is it's Nvidia's attempt to improve the battery life while gaming on laptops that have GeForce graphics in them. And it does it by limiting the frame rate of games to a specified level in software, so that if you're playing a game, I think if you look at the page in our review, Portal 2 has a tremendous result in it, right? If you turn off battery boost, it's rendering at 120 frames per second or whatever, and the battery lasts like 51 minutes. If you enable battery boost, it limits the frame rate to 30, and you can adjust that anywhere from, I think, 20 to 50, and battery life increases by 92%, almost double, to an hour and 38 minutes. That's a pretty impressive result. World of Tanks was tested. It didn't have hardly any improvement, but like BioShock Infinite did have a solid like 48% boost in its battery life gaming capability. And you're you focus on video and image quality and the experience of that kind of stuff. In one of the things that I'm curious on is what your thoughts are on, do you think it would be worth extending your gameplay time by say 50% to cap your frame rate at 30 frames per second?
Oh, no. Personally, there's no way I would ever use that feature. That's too far back in time. As far as frame rates go for at least competitive, any kind of competitive gaming where frame rate's critical, especially for the online multiplayer scene. For regular single player action, there are a lot of games that can run at 30 frames per second and be a really enjoyable experience. But for me personally, I can't even remember the last time I used a gaming notebook that in a gaming scenario that wasn't actually plugged in either, because I'm always worried about suddenly the battery extension technology is kicking in and either reducing frame rate or it's going to kill the battery in like minutes. That's the single, I think still the single most intense thing you can do to a notebook is actually run high-end 3D games on them. So,
oh yeah,
no. I'm going to leave it plugged in. It's the portability is really what I'm going after when I go for a system like that. Above all else, just the convenience of having the display, the CPU, and the GPU all in one nice package that I can put in a backpack and take with me. And like you mentioned, it's known I've got to get to a QuakeCon, but for any LAN experience too, that ability to show up with not a pile of gear requiring you to drag a cart behind you to drag it in, or multiple trips from a car. I remember those days, and I'm glad we have things like LCD monitors now, because at least that cuts.
Lord.
It's not a 17 or 19-inch CRT you're dragging around at least. So
we were cleaning out our basement. I found two 19-inch and a 20-inch CRTs, all with like. These were high-end CRTs, 2048 by 1536, like 78 hertz refresh rates. I'm like, wow, these were really expensive monitors back in the day, and now they're worth like $22. And they're just sitting down in the basement still because I'm like, oh, I don't want to carry them all the way up there unless I know what I'm going to do with it. And people carry those around to LAN parties.
Totally. Even Goodwill won't take those anymore. They're like, that's a disposal situation we're not equipped to deal with anymore. So you have to deal with it either through a waste management or whoever your local recycler is. But
yeah, it's kind of
thank goodness those days are long gone. So
yeah, agreed. So we go from by the way, that notebook was like $2,600. They're expensive, but you're paying for that portability. It's not outrageously priced, I don't think. So you can check out the rest of the review if you're interested in that. But we
another quickie on that notebook, real quick, was wouldn't it be more efficient, you think, down the road where they, instead of having 3, even if they're MSATA, but instead of those 3 drives over an SATA port, wouldn't it be useful to maybe use one of the PCI Express ports that you're seeing on desktop sides where they're actually incorporating high-speed storage systems? Like they're tripling the speeds essentially of read and write, because you're dealing with a much faster bus, and being the parallel or the PCIe slots instead of, say, the SATA slot.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what you will see soon is when the Z97 chipset launched, we kind of saw the first desktop systems utilizing M.2. M.2 is a form factor and interface that can run over PCI Express or SATA data paths, essentially. And obviously the PCI Express, as you're mentioning, is way faster, and the form factor is the same. And so this machine just kind of came out before all of that was really there. We haven't really seen the mobile implementation of Z97 or an equivalent chipset from Intel that will support all of those technologies. But I mean, you're right. I think, I think within the next year to 18 months, we will see kind of SATA only for the standard spindle hard drives, and all the SSDs will either be through SATA Express or M.2 or PCI Express interfaces in the not too distant future. And that will obviously come to gaming laptops, I think, as well. Yeah.
Not a good deal. Something I will be keeping an eye out for, because I think it interests me on the full desktop side of things, just because it seems, at least the current trend is with the SSD drives, is that they are increasing performance so quickly. They're saturating whatever bus they're connected to. So having something like PCI Express to be able just to say, you know what, let's take a leap ahead. Let's let the drives try to catch up to this new interface and go from there. But still, the level of performance you're getting out of a modern, flash-based drive is just awesome, and it's good for everyone.
Yeah, you don't go back after you've had SSDs. Even PCI Express, I think, is going to be another boost up for people that they'll want to stay attached to. Now, if you're not interested in spending $1,000 on a PCI Express SSD, though, you might be interested in our next story, which is a budget gaming PC shootout posted by a new writer of ours named Sebastian. And, you know, pretty much in any kind of hardware community or show or tech show, you always end up talking about what's the best gaming PC for your money. I've only got $400 or $500. What's the best gaming PC you can put together for that? And the discussion is always very complex because when you get down into that price point, there are tons of processors, there are tons of graphics cards, there's tons of motherboards, all of which have their various pros and cons. So this story was quite the undertaking for Sebastian. We're basically looking at 4 unique graphics cards, 4 unique processors, with 3 motherboards, and kind of testing all possible combinations of those and permutations of those. You've got an R7 250 and R7 260X from AMD, and then from Nvidia you have the GTX 750 and the 750 Ti. So graphics cards that range from $80 to $155, and then processors that range from $45 to $85. And again, this is really still just a subset of what could be assembled in these price ranges, but just from a feasibility of testing stuff aspect, we really kind of needed to limit what some of these things were. And I don't want to run through all the individual benchmarks. You guys should go check this out. But like the interesting story is kind of which graphics cards pair with which processors the best, and then how the variation in price kind of comes into that, right? So if you go through the story, he talks about all the components that he picked and the power supply, the memory, the hard drive, they're all common components. And then he tests BioShock, he tests Thief, he tests Metro Last Light, and gets average frame rates for all these different combinations. And the 750 Ti paired with the Pentium G3220 is the fastest card in 2 of those 3 scenarios, or the fastest combination rather in 2 of those 3 scenarios. And then in Metro Last Light, inexplicably, like the top 3 graphics cards paired with the Athlon X4 processor are the top 3 results. So you can kind of see how even having the discussion about what is the best performance for your dollar or dollar per performance metric really depend, like it varies based on the game you're playing.
Were there any oddities
really
that jumped out?
Down.
Were there any oddities in the numbers that jumped out at you? Like, is there a scenario where it's always best to pair an AMD GPU with an AMD CPU, or does it even matter?
No, nothing that specific stood out. If you look at the benchmark pages, like for example, if you look at the BioShock Ultimate benchmark results, there's definitely a shelf that you can kind of see this linear decrease in performance, and then as you scroll down, it jumps from 85 down to 65 frames per second, and that's kind of like you are moving from a high-end, so to speak, processor to a low-end processor, and that makes a world of difference, right? And then every game kind of has that same, basically plateau in performance where we go from the Athlon X4 and the Pentium G3220 down to the AMD AM1 parts, and performance kind of drops off pretty drastically. The other things I would say are that the Intel parts tended to have better minimum frame rates, even if they had slightly slower average frame rates when compared to the quad-core Athlon part, which kind of falls in line with the general premise that Intel has better single core performance, better single threaded performance, and games that where the first bottleneck in games tends to be after the graphics card is how fast is that single game thread going, right? That primary game thread. So that tends to boost things up a little bit. If you look at the last page, there's like this one kind of collective graph that tries to put it all into a single picture, and it's very, very hard to do. And it takes the average frame rate across those 3 individual games, and then kind of basically plots it against the price of all those configurations. And you can kind of see like there's 2 just past middle, if you're going from left to right, that are like 61 frames per second average. and they are under $350, and it's the GTX 750 and the R7 260X paired with that Pentium G3220 processor. And they're not the fastest, but they're pretty close to being with the fastest, and they are, you know, $40 to $50 less expensive, which when we're talking about a $400 total gaming PC is a fairly significant margin. So it's a ton of data, and you go into any forums, you go into the Reddit Build a PC subreddit, and you're going to get, if you ask 100 people, you're going to get 95 different opinions on what is the best combination of hardware if you're trying to build a $400 gaming computer. But I think this collection of data kind of sums up what the overarching kind of total story should be, which is these are the best components for your dollar processor, graphics card. You can change motherboards, you can change hard drives, you can change all that stuff out, and it's obviously going to make a difference here or there. But these are kind of like the core components that we think fit in, and that's, you know, you can kind of see that in that graph display.
I like that. You've come up with
story.
4 or 5 systems actually that get above 60 frames a second, and that's a nice metric that gives you some options for different price points. And like you said, for people out there, they can select whatever parts they want down the road. It's upgradable down the road, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So
yeah,
no matter what you go with right now, if you pick one of these systems and you've got a socketed motherboard that supports you a little bit, at least for a season or two,
right,
you could upgrade the CPU down the road, and GPUs will always be upgradable. I mean, at least for several generations on any particular motherboard, because I don't know, at least I don't see the PCI Express interface changing drastically year to year, like you sometimes see with the socket slots for CPUs. So
I found the process of going through this story with Sebastian as interesting as anything, in that building a low cost system is more difficult than building like a $1,500 system. If somebody says, hey, I've got $1,500, I've got a really good idea of what components I would tell you to buy. When you say my budget is a third of that, things get way more complicated. So there's a reason why everybody tends to fret over that, I guess.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah. And it's just good to see, though, that you can still build quality gaming units at a cost of a decent console system nowadays. So that's the other thing to remind people of, too. Everyone assumes that PC gaming is outrageously expensive, but if you factor it in over the cost of years, you know, it can help get it down. And if you can start with a box in the $300 to $400 range as well, $300, $400, $500, that's not a huge investment, and it gives you some flexibility in terms of what else it can do, be it your workstation or your gaming station, of course, and all the other fun stuff associated with PCing in general. So,
yeah. Now, the title of this next story was now on Amazon, but I've changed it to previously on Amazon because the pricing did change. We were talking about the joys of SSDs. Recently, as last week, Amazon had a 1 terabyte version of the Samsung 840 EVO selling for $399 with Prime shipping. And this is one of our favorite SSDs in terms of performance and cost per gigabyte, and they just keep lowering it down. It was about Christmas time when we saw it go for sale for like $454 for the 1 terabyte version. And so even though now I think it's selling for like $414 on Amazon, it's still, we saw it at $399, which means we're pretty sure we'll see it there again in the not too distant future. And you know, you can get the 500 gigabyte version for, I don't know what it was. It was like $229, I believe.
That's a discount compared to even a few months ago.
$239, yeah. I mean, they're not going to be as cheap as hard drives, but damn it, they're getting close. And you know, for $399, essentially the cost of a high-end graphics card, you can get a 1 terabyte SSD, which means you don't have to like worry about like moving your games back and forth between a hard drive and an SSD, depending on what you're playing. You know, when 128 gig SSDs were like the thing you bought, it quickly became evident that wasn't enough space. So seeing deals and specials like this is awesome. Yeah.
And also, too, I'll just give a shout out for Samsung's Magician software. I've rebuilt a few systems or upgraded a few systems with their drives, specifically the Evo drives, too. And they make it pretty darn slick piece of software in terms of being able to transfer your data but also the final setup too, to ensure that all your performance checks are done right in terms of at least you can verify the drive quickly, update the firmware quickly. I know every SSD manufacturer probably does have similar software, but it worked really well, and I've really never had an issue with it in terms of all the upgrades I've done on a variety of different systems and OSs. And it's a nice, convenient touch to have, where I don't have to go find a particular piece of software to either transfer the data. It's right there in the box, or if I want to ensure that I've got the trim settings and all the other settings that are supposed to be for an SSD upgrade in place, done properly. And it's just also, and for finally things like firmware, which is, I'm like a nerd about just making sure all my firmware and BIOS updates and everything else get done for any particular piece of hardware when I'm building it out. And they made it just super easy to do. So for all those reasons, and the price though, I want to say I picked up a 240 or 250 gig one recently, a few months ago, for something approaching what the price of the 500 gig one is now. So that price decline is awesome. So
it hurts. It hurts when it hits you personally when those price drops happen. But for everybody else overall, the industry overall, it's still a good thing. Now we'll talk about 4K monitors in a little bit, so we'll come back to that. But real quickly, wanted to mention the AMD FX 9590 processor was released last year. It was only meant to go to system builders. And the reason why is because it had an exorbitantly high 200 plus watt TDP. It's an 8-core part that goes up to 5 gigahertz, and it put a lot of demand onto the motherboard and obviously to the power supply. And so the reason AMD didn't want to release it to the public as kind of like a DIY part was that even though it was socket compatible with all the AM3 motherboards out there, it required motherboards that had more robust power delivery mechanisms than most. So they were, trying to take the safe route by saying, okay, system builders can offer this because they're going to vet the motherboards and we know that they're going to use the right product, et cetera. Long story short is that it didn't really work out because the parts ended up for sale at micro centers anyway, and it kind of turned into a little bit of a mess because they weren't selling it with a cooler. Is that the hottest
CPU currently available? I mean, 200 watt TDP sounds like a lot. I mean, does it come with a subscription for a dry ice delivery on a regular basis?
It probably should. The next highest that I am aware of is like the Ivy Bridge E parts are like 140 watt TDPs from Intel. Right.
After all this talk of going the other direction, this just right back into the egg frying scenarios again, where
it is right, and they're not
there, but you have to be able to manage that cooling properly.
Yep. And so now, I guess what they're going to do is they're actually going to release this officially with a self-contained water cooler as part of the box. In the box with it, hence the picture of the processor. I would not recommend dropping your processor into a bowl of water, but it makes for good artwork, if nothing else.
It looks beautiful. Good point.
So here's the interesting thing about this processor is it's not going to be as fast as the highest end Haswell part that Intel offers. But it was going to use a lot more power to get basically on par with that. So this part is for people who are AMD fans, like they have that platform already, or they want to support AMD because they want to keep that underdog guy going. This is really the part for that. It's going to use more power, and it's going to be maybe as good as, say, 4770 or 4790K. We're supposed to be getting one in to do some testing on in the not too distant future, but it's becoming available to the consumer. Yeah.
For the AMD fan who wants to build that hot rod system with the highest end part they could possibly get out of the company, short of some one-off engineering sample. So,
yeah,
and on that
short
level,
of getting that dry ice level.
I'm glad they actually released something like this, because it is pretty unique, and you don't see too many CPUs shipping with their own cooling system, liquid cooling system included in the box either. So.
No, it's a pretty risky move, but if you look at what the AMD as a company has done recently, remember they released the Radeon R9 295X2 graphics card, which is a dual GPU graphics card that has 2 water blocks with a self-contained, liquid cooling system on the card. Like you buy it and it is with the 120 millimeter radiator, and that's how the card comes. That was a pretty big risk on their part, right? Nobody had really done that before. They kind of said, we don't really need to pay attention to those PCI Express power concerns. This is kind of in the same mentality of, it's going to take a little bit more work for us to get to the performance levels we want to get to, but there are people out there willing to pay for it. We're willing to develop it. Let's release that part and see kind of what the result is. And when you're the underdog, you got to take chances like that. You've got to kind of move things around, maybe force the hand of other people. So I think it's interesting. I think it will be interesting. I don't think it will be. It's not going to be like my most recommended part or something going forward. I'm pretty sure, based on what I know about the part already and how physics operates. But I think it'll be neat for the people that are interested in it.
Awesome.
Now you are our display monitor expert, so I was glad that this story came up this week, and you also have experience with Seiki, as I do. I have the Seiki 50-inch and I have the 39-inch 4K TVs at our office.
I too own the 50. It's a decent display.
That is the exact way to put it. It is a decent display. It was the first low-cost 4K, and it pushed a lot of other stuff forward. I think like they kind of, from our vantage point as a PC gamer, they forced the graphics card vendors to wake up and suddenly had to support 4K and what that meant, and then it moved into what the Asus and Sharp monitors did. But now Seiki is going to dive in.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was going to say, I had flashbacks to where Westinghouse Digital had, when they introduced some of the first 1080p panels, I had like the same feeling here. It's like, here's a low cost. Everyone said, oh no, this will be another year or two off, and boom, here it is today. Here it is at increasingly affordable prices. There are several 4K UHD options out there now for under $500 in the 40-inch and larger sizes. And it's just going to continue on and on. And these new Seiki displays appear to be pretty decently spec'd for the desktop environment. And God, I cannot wait to see them. They're saying early 2015 before they start shipping these. But if on paper, it looks phenomenal for the price. And the other thing too, they haven't talked price points yet. So yeah, I'll be really curious to see how they'll compare to what LG and Samsung currently have available, and some of the off brands as well.
Mm-hmm. It was, I don't think Seiki's ever done monitors before this, right? So they're kind of moving into this Seiki Pro branding, I guess is what they're going to call it. And you mentioned early 2015. That was kind of a disappointing part of the announcement. No pricing. That makes sense because it's so far in advance. But they're going to release a 28-inch, a 32-inch, and a 40-inch 4K monitor using a vertical aligned LED panel. Do you have any experience with the vertically aligned monitors at all?
I want to say that's similar to what Samsung does in some of their display technology. So the big question I have people asking me, is it going to be a TN-based panel or not, the twisted pneumatic, the old school style, or is this something a step up from that in terms of better black levels in particular, better off-axis viewing, hopefully for a PC. Although on the PC side of things, that's less of a concern unless you're sitting really close to the monitor and you can't get that full view of the screen the way it should be appreciated. But overall,
I honestly don't know that much about the VA tech. I did some reading after coming across this press release, and it is a definition of a panel technology like TN or IPS or IGZO is, and it seems to be, from what everybody is talking about it is somewhere between TN and IPS in terms of visual quality. So one of those things we'll just kind of have to see when they come closer to available. It does have 12-bit color processing, so they are kind of aiming it at the professional level market. They're claiming support for HDMI 2.0, DisplayPort 1.3. Both of these don't really have any shipping products yet, and they don't have any sources using those technologies yet. I think the most interesting feature listed on here for me is the idea of a picture-by-picture mode by 4. So the idea here would be that with a 4K monitor, especially if you have a 40-inch screen, you have the potential to have 4 1080p unscaled images on the screen at the same time. So if you have 4 inputs in the back, you could maybe feed a different source to each and have essentially 4 20-inch 1080p panels with no bezel between them. And
Ooh,
for
I like
like,
that.
yeah, like the immediate idea I had was, okay, I have a very specific workflow, right? We've got a testing machine that is its own computer. It usually has its own separate monitor off to the side. And I've got my working machine, and then maybe we've got a third monitor someplace. What I would do with this is I would put a 40-inch panel on my desk, which is a big monitor to put on your desk. But maybe you get the top left, and that's your testing computer through HDMI in. And then the top right is, maybe your laptop's hooked up to it or something like that. And then the bottom two, you hook up to your primary desktop, and you make it 12560 by 1080 resolution panel, like with iFinity or something like that. And so now you're working with a 2560 by 1080 screen while you have your testing computer or a DirecTV box hooked up to the other corner, and you have this 140-inch panel that has all this information from these different sources kind of coming into it. And I can think of all kinds of ways that would be interesting to utilize, even if you're not interested in actually using all 4K, from a single machine at one time.
It sounds like a flexible panel in terms of what it can do. And I'll be also curious to see if it mimics what the Seiki 50-inch 4K can currently do in terms of accepting 120 hertz at 1080p, that formatted signal. That to me was probably more interesting. And once the firmware update they did on that particular TV also fixed an overscan issue and other little things, but being able to run that high of a frame rate directly off of a PC at a standard resolution like 1080p might be more appealing to some folks than simply having, a 4K panel. Although that, having that extra resolution is going to be nice no matter how you slice and dice it. But I think that high performance 1080p as well might appeal to some other people for the very reason of the fact that you can run, driving 1080p at 120 hertz with modern graphics hardware isn't a far stretch anymore.
No.
You can do that with a good high-end product, and I think that level of performance on an LCD is something I've been kind of waiting for since the PC days. And I know I have to take the leap and probably upgrade to a nice 144 hertz display here soon, and start experimenting truly, get my hands on it and start messing with it in person. But just seeing that, I've seen a few of these current 4K and UHD televisions actually do accept a 1080p 120 signal. I think is going to hopefully keep people interested on the PC side of things, at least.
I think it will. We've got some questions to get to here. We'll get to a couple of them this week. If you want to send us a question, and I highly encourage you guys to do so, the email address is twich, TWICH, @twit.tv, and so then we go through those a couple times a week, filter out some of the better questions, and put them up here on the show. So send us your questions. We need your questions to get through our show on a weekly basis. So keep them coming. Let's see. There's an email here from Sebastian about cooling passive video cards. He says, weekly listener of the show as well as the PC Per podcast. Thanks, Sebastian. I have a buddy of which I've assembled a computer for, I assume. He's now running 2 Gainward GTX 680 Phantom cards in SLI. The problem is one card seems to be throttling very quickly due to temperatures. He's using a Cooler Master CM Storm Enforcer case. It has a plexiglass side with no room for a fan. I was thinking of switching out the case to one which supports having a fan on the side for the GTX cards, but I'm unsure if that will help. Case has a front fan, has a top fan, and in the back is the Corsair H100 radiator, which blows out hot air. Any advice on how I can help him cool down these cards? If you look at the picture that I posted in there, I had not seen this card before. This is a completely passively cooled GTX 680 video card, which has, I think, like a TDP of 250 watts, I want to say.
It's not ice cold, that's for sure. So
that's
a passive card. It probably runs just fine, but it is dumping all that heat somewhere, especially if there's no active cooling whatsoever to even draw it outside of the case. So you're relying on whatever airflow is within the box itself to help, manage that. And
yeah,
I imagine a side fan would probably help, but it would really depend on the overall case design up front. I mean, usually you want that front to back, consistent airflow, push all the heat in one direction, and introduce cool filtered air, hopefully filtered. I hate You know, there's one thing to have a lot of fans to be able to cool anything, but if it's creating a noise environment, that's unacceptable. Or if you're just sucking in all the room dust, where you've got to take the thing apart once every quarter and blow it out in order to effectively maintain that level of cooling, that's a pain in the butt too. So I would say with the cost of cases right now, I mean, there's a million different options to go with. But if you could have something that would help increase airflow through the section where the graphics cards are, maybe in the current case, there's other items you can remove, maybe an unused drive cage or other items that are in the way. I'd have to really take a good look at the inside of the box itself. Cable management, of course, get everything out of the way. It's all about, I guess, minimizing things that interrupt or disrupt the airflow through the system. But man, it's a challenge
I would say so he's got two of them. So and it says the secondary one, the first one's going to be higher up on the motherboard, and so you're more likely to have a good flow of air in one and out the other. The problem is probably that second one is lower in the system, and it may be sitting in kind of this dead area where there's no airflow. Air's flowing over it, you know, kind of above it to the primary card, but not over the secondary. And when you have a completely passively cooled product, you have to have airflow. You can have slow airflow probably, but you have to have airflow. And I was kind of looking at the pictures of his case that I looked up, and what you could do is you can cut a hole in that plexiglass, you know, get a Dremel and put like a side fan right there and blow air onto that lower heatsink that way. Or you can look at upgrading his case to one that kind of has a side mount fan already on it. And you can get a high quality fan so that the noise level is going to be low. Obviously, if he bought passive cards, he's really concerned about noise levels. And I think that's probably what's happening.
Do you think it'd be worth experimenting with just a separate fan altogether? Just put it in the case somewhere, like maybe in the back side of the graphics cards, pushing toward the back, just to see if that affects it whatsoever, and then go from there.
Yeah.
Or I wonder if you could even
take a case fan, like set it on the bottom of the case and point it directly across.
There it is.
Heatsink to that one.
I also wonder too if perhaps they make a door for that case that's already pre-done for, although that would cost probably more money than just simply taking a Dremel or a drill and just drill out enough holes in a nice pattern if you wanted to really make it look better, but just drill a grill through that plexi and then add the fan to the inside and have it pull through. That'd be another way just to get more air into it. But whatever you can do to, that's a pretty packed environment right there. But I would look to just to the right of those two graphics cards. If there is a drive cage that's in the way that you can take out and move stuff elsewhere, to allow the fans that are probably up front, at least one of them, to just have a clean, straight shot at those cards, to put some air in between them and through them out the back. But that's a tough one.
Yeah,
I like the passive cards, but if it's causing throttling issues, that would be a pain in the butt. And that's something that's one of those gotcha moments you just wouldn't realize until it's all put together. It's like, oh, you know what? These cards are passive and it's super quiet, but guess what? Runs running at like 30% slower than the other, or one's hitting its thermal max almost immediately and the other one takes another, I don't know, 20 minutes or so to hit that point. And interesting problem.
How about an email from Talal about a high-end motherboard? He says, hello there, I have a quick question. I've recently decided to build my own PC and want to ask something. Is it worth it to get a high-end motherboard if I don't plan to overclock? Just for the quality and features, or are these features mostly gimmicks? The PC will be for gaming and some office work. This is kind of a loaded question because some motherboards, high end indicates like high price, I think. And there are some motherboards that are high priced that have like a ton of very specific features. Like if you look at some of the high end gigabyte overclocking motherboards, they have things meant for LN2 overclockers, things meant for that extreme, you know, direction of audience. And I don't think many of those are called those gimmicks. Yeah, totally. Yeah, you'll never need it. And then you look at, say, on the other direction, you've got something like the Asus Z97 Deluxe, and it has features like it has an NFC reader inside of it. It has a what else does it have? It has an NFC reader. It has 802.11 AC, built into it. It has, I think this one has Thunderbolt. It has like a lot of other features that you may or may not use. And if you, I guess the way I would say it is, if you don't have a specific need for any of those things that are listed on that board, step down a notch or two, right?
Heck yeah. I totally agree with that.
When Asus came to see us about their Z97 platform, they were very upfront about, the performance and overclocking capability you get from the Z97A motherboard, like this low-cost mainstream board, is going to be almost exactly the same all the way up through their product stack. What changes are, do you want two Intel-based networking connections? Do you want two SATA express ports? Do you want 0 SATA express ports? Do you want support for 4 additional SATA connections through a as media controller? Do you need the upgraded audio? Do you need that NFC reader? Do you need Thunderbolt included in it? And if you don't bother with those products, right? Like, they were very upfront about it, and I think consumers are definitely appreciative of that mindset. And if you're doing gaming, you're doing office work, and you don't need those things, you can save a lot of money by like recognizing the fact of how similar the low-cost board is to the high-cost board, minus those pack-ins.
Totally. It's going to come down to more about your core components, what GPU and CPU you're using, I think, than the actual motherboard itself. I always want a quality motherboard. That's going to be the play area for all those parts. And you don't want something that's going to fall apart on you, so you go with a name brand. But yeah, if it's integrating a bunch of hardware that you are never going to use, by all means, that's more stuff that can go wrong, more energy to be consumed. For me personally, the single most important thing that's improves the stability of my networks and systems here at home is having an uninterrupted power supply to manage the electricity coming into that box and to keep it just flat lines where it's not spiking, it's not sagging. Those are the things that destroy hardware over the years quicker than anything. And it's stuff you usually can't even tell is happening unless you're watching a light flicker and dim, or it's very obvious that there's a problem with the electricity. You almost never notice the day-to-day little spikes and surges that can happen. So investing in something like an uninterrupted power supply, I think no matter what system you use, is going to be a great tool just to help preserve and to enhance the quality and the longevity of any box down the road. I've been using uninterrupted power supplies practically my entire computing life, at least for the last 15 plus years. And I can't think of the last major hardware failure I've had based on just simply for that. It's very rare I come across just straight up failures in hardware, and I'm attributing it to the uninterrupted power supplies, but still, I think that's the single best piece of gear you can have if you're looking just to preserve a box over the long term, especially if you ever do plan to do things like overclocking down the road. I don't know if it's really going to help you out with that, but just preserving what you got and keeping that crazy power that your electrical company may or may not be carefully generating, or if you live in I've lived in some ancient buildings too where the wiring was just atrocious, or it was just old, and every little thing around you affected the quality of that power, and it would directly affect the electronics you plug into it. So I think it's just having that firewall in a sense between you and the power coming into the dwelling is an important step for anybody with computing hardware. And if you can save some money going down this route, yeah, you don't need the high-end features of a motherboard if you never plan to use them. Like you mentioned, specifically Thunderbolt, built-in Wi-Fi, items like that. Yeah. Unless you have a need for it, those are also things you can typically add down the road too if you ever do specifically come across the need for that. You can buy an add-on card or an adapter of some kind. But those are the questions you should ask yourself as well when you're putting together a new box for your parts needs. What exactly is it you need it to do? Would it be more convenient to have that specific feature built in rather than deal with add-ons down the road, and so forth? Agreed.
Let's do one more question, and we'll get to it because it involves displays again. I figure while we've got you here, this comes in from Scott. It says, actually appropriately says, hello, Ryan and Patrick, or the appropriate fill-in. When Nvidia hosted an epic LAN party in the USS Hornet in 2011, where I met Ryan, and wished Patrick was there so he could buy us a beer. Okay. I can appreciate that. I was in the row that won the then prototype Asus VG278H, which was the first G-Sync monitor that was released. I've been using that monitor since that November and absolutely love it. However, it's time for me to upgrade my center monitor to something new and shiny. With some new monitors coming down the pike from Asus, one of my most beloved brands, I'm revving up my wallet for a big hardware buy. That's what everybody likes to hear in the hardware industry. I'm currently torn between the PB287Q 4K and the PG278Q ROG Swift. Like the higher refresh rates of the VG278H, so I'm thinking the G-Sync feature might be nice to have. But I had the chance to play Titanfall with my 880M equipped Sager laptop. I was absolutely blown away. I guess the ultimate question is, should I has all the pixels or should I has all the frames? What's your kind of thought process in that?
For me, it comes down to what graphics you're using to drive those displays. So if you've got something that's already pushing the edge and you're replacing your graphics card every year with the latest and greatest, then you probably should treat yourself to a 4K display just to have that there. So when you buy the next graphics card, you are definitely ready to go. But the frame rate manipulating features of some of the new monitors are the things that interest me the most. So that, I think, Ron, you probably speak to that better than I can in terms of what the benefits are. But it seems like the new technologies in terms of managing frame rates on the hardware side to provide just a silky smooth performance that get rid of the hitches, yet at the same time get the full performance out of the monitor you can. I'm almost thinking it comes back to getting closer and closer to what CRT-like performance used to be. We're finally approaching that now with the latest LCD panels, and that to me is something I have yet to experience. I'm still dealing with old school 60 hertz monitors in front of me, but yeah, I love them, but I do see the future coming, and I would like something that's got a nice frame rate bump in performance in addition to just being ready for higher resolutions down the road. I tend to shy toward the lower resolution display. If I had a choice between the two, I might go lower because then I can game at the native frame rate or the native resolution of the display a little easier at maximum quality. But again, that really comes back to what CPU and GPU you're using. And then on top of that, what monitor you want to connect to it from there. And then it's usually as big as I can put in front of me. That's the other thing too. I've also noticed I think I have 24-inch monitors in front of me at 19 by 12. And I wouldn't want a pixel density any less than that. That's the other thing I've come to notice. Maybe it's mobile devices I've been using now for a couple of years, but just having these retina quality displays or where the pixel density is above, say, 230 dots per inch, that's damn appealing and good looking on the eyes. Where you can see no pixel structure. That's the ideal goal. Okay. So the higher resolution displays are moving toward that. And that's one area where I'd be more tempted to go with a higher resolution display over a lower resolution display as well.
It's the two that he mentioned specifically there, that the 287Q, which is the $650 4K TN panel from Asus. I have that one, and so I know what the experience is of that. The second one he mentions is a 25 by 14 120 hertz panel, 27-inch, and it supports G-Sync. So I haven't seen that one in person since CES and haven't used it for a long enough period of time to really make, a concrete decision about the two. I would lean towards that 25 by 14, 27-inch, 120 hertz G-Sync enabled panel. Now, if you don't have NVIDIA graphics cards, the G-Sync feature won't be useful for you. You'll still get the ability to run at the higher refresh rate, but the variable refresh rate feature of G-Sync is obviously going to be limited to GTX 600 and 700 series graphics cards. Once we get the adaptive sync enabled monitors, which should be coming very late this year, you'd be able to support variable refresh rates on AMD and NVIDIA graphics cards.
See, that was my other question too. When will we have displays that are getting beyond the proprietary nature of either technology for either side and says, you know what, we'll support them all. Just use whatever
I think it'll be the very end of 2014, probably. We had an AMD guy out at our office last week. Richard Huddy did an interview, and he told me, he's like, you'll probably have one, Ryan, in September, October as a prototype to start playing with it and testing it. Availability would probably be the very, very end of 2014. So it wouldn't surprise me if the big push happens kind of at CES 2015. So Nvidia has a small window now, a much smaller window than I thought they would have, to get their G-Sync monitors out there. If you're an Nvidia user, if you like the directions they're doing with software, there's no reason to kind of be scared of a G-Sync panel. And the G-Sync is the only technology that I have used long term, and it works really, 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 really well. So I love the 4K, but I also love the 120 hertz 25 by 14 monitor. And I guess what I'm really saying is I want 4K by 120 hertz. So let's just make that happen instead.
Then what interface are we going to use to drive that? That'll be the new one, I guess. Is DisplayPort ready to go?
1.3, I think it will support that. I don't know. But I mean, you got to build scalers for it, and then you've got to have a graphic system that can push it. But really, I just want all that now. So maybe it'll happen, maybe not. But I guess to answer this one, guys.
Though. For the frame sync technology is coming up late this year, early next year. So I am very keen to hear more about that.
I hope that they take it more than just gaming. Like, I want them to see, if you're playing back a movie that's 24 frames per second, there's no reason why the monitor shouldn't also update to 24 frames per second, for example.
Or multiple of that. Yeah. 60 hertz should have died a long time ago, unfortunately, and it's sticking around. I don't mind if something has to run at that for legacy purposes, but I mean, going just to 72, even some multiple of 24 would solve a lot of issues, or make it a more cinematic display.
When our first story on G-Sync came out, there was a big editorial portion about explaining how we came to 60 hertz and why it was necessary with CRT monitors, why it's no longer necessary, but how it still exists because of attachment to previous systems and software and how computers were built. It's kind of one of those sad, depressing stories of why
to the past
stuff. Yeah, why bad stuff is still here affecting us today. So that's going to wrap up the show, I think. Again, thank you guys for emailing us. The Twitch at twit.tv is the address for that. If you are new to the show, come visit us at twit.tv/Twitch, where you can find all of our back episodes. You can find our RSS feeds for the audio and video version. And of course, we do record it live on at twit.tv on Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And Robert, thank you again for filling in for Patrick. It's always great to have you on. It's always interesting to see different perspectives. I've known Patrick long enough, and I interact with him a lot. I know most of the time what his opinion is going to be on various stories. So
good to shake it up once in a while.
It's good to mix it up every once in a while. He'll take a week off. I'll take a week off. We get somebody not completely new, but new enough in there. So
fresh faces.
Exactly. Thank you again for stopping by. And to everybody else, we will see you next week on Twitch.